I'm Judy Byron. I'm the adult program coordinator here at the Waterbury Library. Joe approached me last fall about doing this series, Building Better Waterbury. I love the name. And so I'm really happy to welcome all of you and just be a collaborator in partnership with you. And I think I'll turn it over to you, Joe, to just introduce the program and take it away.
Okay, good. Thank you, Judy. As Judy said, my name is Joe Camerata from the Waterbury Housing Task Force, and would like to just take a few minutes to introduce what we're trying to accomplish with this education series, and then most of it will be turning it over to Mike and Neil and let them partake all of their great knowledge on zoning and permitting, which is important. But maybe to get started, we'll start with looking at why the task force was formed. Can we look at the next slide? And you know, in the municipal plan for 2018, there was the goal of creating new housing locations that maintain the integrity of neighborhoods, right? So it was, and didn't require additional infrastructure development. So the idea was to be really to focus on developing what's called infill development, developing where things already are, okay? So it's actually a couple of interesting things that have happened since then, both at the state and the local level. So the Vermont Home Act was passed last year, and that actually opened up the opportunities for doing ADUs and duplexes in all locations. In addition to that, Waterbury passed a set of new zoning bylaws that actually pertain to the greater downtown district, and that makes it even easier to add and do infill development in that area. And on the financial side, there was a program that was put forth by the state called the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, called VHIP program, and that provides funding to people that are interested in doing this in exchange for what's called affordable rent for a period of time. And in addition to that, last year Waterbury established and funded a housing trust fund, and we're putting programs in place for that. So with all of these things, what I'd like to talk about is this idea of doing small scale development. And when we talk about small scale, we talk about units of usually sizes of 1 to 4 units. So we're not talking about bigger things. It's not to say that we don't need medium and large scale development. We will. To solve the housing crisis, we'll need all of them. But there's a lot of advantages to also looking at small scale development. So, and I wanted to kind of go through those. So first of all, by doing small scale development, you help to preserve the integrity, both the architectural and historic integrity of Waterbury, because you're building in places where you already have development, and usually it's done in a way that matches from an architectural point of view. It also, what did you say?
Yeah, if you can actually stand closer to the owl.
Okay. It also helps to support conservation because you're not building in open spaces, you're actually building where you already have the infrastructure, so you're getting better use of your infrastructure and conserving your open spaces. And then also the third point is that it really kind of allows residents to shape what the future of Waterbury looks like. You know, when you start talking about medium and large scale developers, you're having developers that are coming in, they're most likely not from the area, you know, and they're not going to be in the area after development's done usually. So, but by doing these small scale developments, the residents are really able to shape what where the housing is and what the housing looks like. So we had other things can be tailored to meet a broader range of income levels because it's more flexibility in terms of providing affordable housing in smaller units. The other thing for the property owner, and I know this has become a big topic, is it really begins to allow them to leverage their individual property, their land, in order to create additional income. You can, if you have a large piece of land or you have an existing structure where you're putting an accessory dwelling unit, you're then able to collect rental income on that, which helps to offset the rising costs that we continue to see here in Vermont. So we had a public forum that was held in September of last year, and we brought some people together and just said, what do you want to know, right? So what we decided was we set an objective for an education series, and that's to educate and empower individual property owners to increase housing capacity through the construction of duplexes and accessory dwelling units. And when we asked people what they wanted to know about that, 4 topics really came to the top. And that's first and foremost is zoning and permitting. It was the most requested topics, which reason we're holding it as our first workshop. The second is around design and construction, and that workshop will be held on March 18th. Workshop on financing on April, and then we'll close it out in May with rental property management. So 4 workshops, they will all be held here. You see the dates starting at 6 o'clock, okay? And with that, I believe, there's some additional resources here, which if you have this QR code, if you go onto the website that's at the bottom, you'll find these resources. There's a lot of great resources, both at the state and regional level, on the construction of ADUs, and you'll be able to go onto our website our page on the town website, and have access to those resources.
I can hear you perfectly, thanks.
Okay, all right. Well, that's Neil, by the way. Neil Leitner is the community planner. So I always just like to start out just by giving a little overview of the way that planning and zoning works in Waterbury, which is a little bit different from other towns in Vermont. So in a lot of towns, and the way it was for many years here, there was a planning and zoning director. And then usually there's some other title, either assistant planner, assistant zoning something, whatever. They come up with other titles in different towns. When Steve retired, there was kind of a reorganization. We had a new town manager, different ideas, different things, and it was decided that the planner would just be the planner, and the zoning administrator, who, for those who live in Waterbury, remember was originally appointed by the Planning Commission for a period of time, which was a little bit old-fashioned nowadays with different human resource issues and whatnot. So the ordinance, or the charter, was changed to have the town manager hire the zoning administrator. So that's how we ended up with our model that we have now. So typically right now what's happened is when people want to have an ADU, they will either contact me or they'll call me, typically on a Monday, because they've had all weekend to talk about it. That's what I always say, Monday's my busiest day for questions. And they have an idea, they might want to have an accessory dwelling unit, maybe they read something online, and so that they'll call me and talk to me about it. But with the new Home Act, they allow, for the most part, they allow accessory dwelling units in duplexes wherever single-family homes are located. So even if that, isn't an area where maybe they weren't allowed before, it pretty much trumps our zoning bylaws. We have to let them do it. And there's a whole bunch of other little tentacles that came off from that if you're on water and sewer, you can actually do even more than just that. If it's an area that's served by water and sewer, any place where a single family home is permitted, you can do a lot. You can do actually quite a number of units. So there's a lot that came out of that Home Act that people in Waterbury are benefiting from. And it also allowances for higher density development and reduced parking requirements. So in the town, the Planning Commission did a great job with changing some of the Phase 1 bylaws, which allows for increased housing density in the downtown, expanded allowance for multi-unit homes, reduced the lot size requirements, which was huge, and reduced setback requirements. Not everybody was happy with the way it came out with the setback requirements, but so far overall, I would say it's worked out pretty well. There's been a number of questions about that, how that gets handled, but so far, we really haven't seen any big issues with that. Neil, did you just want to jump in and offer anything else to that?
Sure. I'll give a little bit of a background. So in the fall of 2020, the legislature passed was Act 147, I believe, and that allowed for ADUs to be approved through the site plan approval process, which means a zoning administrator could approve your ADU request. Prior to that, all ADUs basically had to go through the conditional use permit process, which the main difference in terms of an ADU between conditional use and site plan approval is that you would have to show that your proposed ADU, for instance, in your backyard, has no impact to the character of the area. And that was an impediment. I witnessed it many times prior to 2020. People who wanted to build an ADU in their backyard, they didn't get their approval. They had to go to the development review board. They had to notify all the neighbors. If neighbors didn't want that, they could come out, and character of the area is, sometimes vague. So it was something that could be leveraged to prevent someone from building an ADU. And also it just added that whole layer of bureaucratic mess, basically, for a homeowner to get an ADU. Even if that ADU met all the required zoning provisions, setbacks, etc., they still had to do this and go through the public hearing process and prove that they're not changing the character of the area. And so it was an impediment. A lot of people who wanted to do ADUs ended up finding out the process and backing out. And so in the fall of 2020, that changed. And so that was step one for Vermont, to be able to make it just site plan review, which means that as long as you meet your setbacks, and setbacks would be 20 feet from a property line or whatever your setbacks are, but as long as you are placing your ADU on your property within your setbacks, it is an administrative approval that Mike could approve. And you don't need to go to the DRB. You don't need to prove that it is part of the character of the area. The reality is most ADUs are part of the character of the area. That's kind of the point of the ADU, is that it's a small scale development. So it's kind of a backyard development or a duplex or something like that. So that was eliminated. And that opened the door quite a bit in 2020. And then most recently with the Home Act, it furthered it even more. It's statewide. So those two acts really made it much more accessible for homeowners or property owners to be able to build an ADU. And that set the groundwork for where we are now, where ADUs are now a lot easier to build because there's a lot less bureaucratic red tape to cut through. And now it's just a lot more simple. You can look at it just as a building process or a building permit, basically. The only times in Waterbury, for instance, is if you don't meet your setbacks, which in that case, you would have to get a waiver to setback. So that is an exception. But if you meet your setbacks, that's something that is more or less seen as a building permit. So that's made it a lot easier. So that's where we're at.
Great, thanks Neil for that. And as Neil talked about, getting the zoning permit is actually pretty easy now. There are several times where someone conceivably could walk in with their completed application. I could look at it, and as long as you meet the setbacks, you're walking out with a permit. We do get 30 days from the time we receive a permit to review it and approve it or deny it. It typically doesn't take that long. Sometimes it can. If we get a big pile of permits and we have a whole bunch of other stuff going on, it could take that long. But typically, permits can be turned around within a week or two. And as Neil talked about, if you came in and you wanted to build an ADU, but you maybe were over the setback, there is a waiver to setback. You can go to the DRB. But one thing that we've noticed with all these new changes at the state level is the number of DRB meetings have certainly been reduced. I've been here, a year and a half or so, and I think I counted up the other day, we've only had 9 DRB meetings, which is crazy from even right before I started, before the Home Act, before, they were having, 2 full meetings a month with different things related. So just changing all these rules freed up a lot of time for DRB to be focusing on bigger, bigger, I don't want to say more important projects, but ones that are more involved. Joe?
When they say what DRB stands for, what they do?
Sure. The Development Review Board is a separate standalone board that's appointed by the Select Board. They are under their own legal rules, their own legal authority. They are a legal operating board, and they review any projects separate from the Select Board. The Select Board cannot influence them. The Select Board could write a letter, but they cannot be influenced. They cannot, if the Select Board can't tell the DRB how to do their job or what they should be doing, it's all in our bylaws. And they are their own legal entity. So that's completely separate from the town. So they're the only other board like that in the state, from the Select Board of the City Council. So the Development Review Board, a lot of people will come into me and say, how can I get this approved without going to the DRB? That's a common one. Just because going to the DRB, the steps are, if you were to have to go there, you would come in. So you would fill out, with the application. We have to notify your neighbors. I give you a form letter with when the hearing date would be. Has to be so many days in advance. Has to be warned in the paper. Has to be warned publicly, and then you come in and they hold the hearing. And they're the ones who decide whether something should be approved or not. And then if they give me the okay, they vote for it, then I can issue the permit within so many days after the approval. But now to get an ADU, it's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to do. And a lot of times people come in and say, how can I do it? And I'll show them how to do it. We'll take a look at their property. We'll take a look at what the setbacks are in their neighborhood and their zoning district, and then we'll come up with a plan on how to get them to an approval. If you're not changing the footprint of your property, it's $250 plus $15 recording fee that the town clerk charges. If you're changing the footprint of your property, you're adding onto it and an addition, or you're bringing in, I don't want to say a tiny house, but something like that where you're bringing it in or building a cottage on your property, and then it's 40 cents a square foot plus $15 for the recording. We don't get into septic systems. That's between you and the state. We don't regulate septic systems. People will commonly ask me, well, what about septic? Do I need more septic? And we say, we don't know if you need more septic or not. And you can go visit one of our two well-known engineers in town, and they can help you decide whether you need more septic or not. Sometimes I hear back from people saying, oh yeah, I need to expand it, or no, they said I'm fine, or whatever the issue is. Those are things we talk about sometimes. But if you just dropped off a permit and it was going to be above your garage, and you say adding ADU above my garage, pretty much you're getting a permit. The only other thing that could be an issue is if you're on town water or you're on the municipal water and sewer system. I have to have an okay from them that you've set up the new service before I can issue you the permit. So it's pretty straightforward. Neil talked about conditional use review and site plan review. That's, if you were to go to DRB especially, you really need to have I think a fairly good site plan. One of the things that I will say is kind of a negative to all these changes. The idea that, unfortunately, especially in the downtown, that an average homeowner could just fill out a site plan and draw it up themselves and bring it to the DRB, the Development Review Board, for approval, if it was going there, are probably towards, kind of being sunsetted at this point. There's a lot of components that go into the site plan review, especially in the flood zone, especially with stormwater, and you really probably need a professional engineer to help you with that site plan. There are just too many issues, especially when you're doing more higher density. There's too many issues. So that's one kind of negative thing that's happened with these rules, is that it's harder for a homeowner just to fill out the application on their own and then come on down and go in front of the DRB. So just keep that in mind. But I can whoever comes in with their application, I can walk you through that. I can talk to you about it and say what the DRB is probably going to be looking for. Downtown, for example, it's in the historic district, so they typically want to see what kind of siding you're doing, what kind of look of the building is, windows. If you're putting in new windows, they want to know the kind of window patterns you're having. It has to be the character of the neighborhood, which, as Neil pointed, talked about, sometimes that can be up for debate, and there has been some big debates over what's considered the character of the neighborhood. But that's just the way it goes. So any questions on that? Site plan review, conditional use, everyone understands that? Yes? Okay. And so I'll just say before we switch over to fire safety, we are so close right now to launching our new online permitting system. And what's going to happen is we're going to go from a pen and paper model to fully online. So what's going to happen is somebody will be able to log into our website and start your application from start to finish, and it will be all on the web, including certificates of occupancies or completions. We'll be able to log conditions in there. People will, if I decide that, do I need to come out and check and see if the shed was put in the right place, or the shed really what you said, there's a component in there I can ask the person to take a photo with their phone, and it loads right into the software for me. So then we have a record of what it looks like. So there's lots of things we can do with it, but we're gonna be switching to that, I would say, probably the next couple weeks. We're so close to launching that right now. We're in the final stages of testing. So the old days of filling everything out in pen and paper are gonna be gone. And so if someone was applying for an ADU, you would just go in and there's a whole ADU section in there, and it will walk you through it. You choose your zoning, or you put in your address, it walks you through how to find out what your zoning district is, and then it talks about any conditions that you would need to get your application approved. Everything is corresponded from town staff through there, and so everything's documented, and then at the end you can actually print out your permit right from the software. So, Neil, anything else before we go?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Yes.
Just a quick question. You were talking about people who are interested in ADUs. If folks are interested in a duplex, is that the same by right process as ADUs?
Yes.
And Mike, if you would just repeat the question.
Oh, sure. So the question is the way I understand it is, I was talking about ADUs, but are duplexes the same thing? So yes, in most cases, I want to hear a little bit more about it, but yes. So we had a case recently where somebody, it was found out that somebody had bought, if anybody's here have ever been to Home Depot, they have these like huge sheds like in their parking lot, and people always say, well, that'd be a great tiny house. Well, this person bought 2 of those and brought it to their property and finished them all off and made them like super nice. But they'd only applied for a shed permit at one point. And so we found out about it through various ways that this was happening here. And so so basically what happened is in that case is we made, even though they're exact same square footage, we could not find a reason why that's a problem, where it doesn't say anymore in the state, the Home Act, that the ADU has to be a certain size compared to the main part of the house. So we made that a single family home with an ADU. And that's the way that ended up getting approved. And he also got the after the fact permit fine that we just enacted last year. Actually, that was our first one. And so way we look at it typically is that if you're coming in and you're building 2 properties that are mirrored, typically that's more of a duplex, but it would still fall under the same rules most likely. And as I talked about earlier, like there's a couple of like weird scenarios that I think were just loopholes in the law. So one of them was you can build up to 9 units. If the area is permitted to build single family homes, you can build, is it up to 9 units, Neil, I believe, right? We're talking about over on Crossroad there.
Oh, well, that was to avoid Act 250.
Yeah, right. So you keep it up to 9 units, but that was on water and sewer. And so that is approved because it's it's on water and sewer, and that it's just a little section of Waterbury that falls under that Home Act. And so where other times they would have to go to the DRB and go through go through the whole process, but in that case there, because it's permitted for single family homes and it's on water and sewer, they can build more than the 2 units. So there's little things like that that maybe weren't thought about, so there's pockets of opportunity that in Waterbury that you can find. I can list probably 5 or 6 different properties right here in the old village boundaries that are perfect for infill, that are available for infill. Property owners know it, but right now, for one reason or another, it's hard for them to get the project off the ground. It could be financing, could be building material costs, could be, they just don't know the first steps, right? They don't know they have this opportunity. Where do we go from here?
What does infill mean?
So infill would be like, it's a property, but now with the new bylaws, it has enough setback so you can kind of build off from it. So an example would be like up across, where Gardner Lane is, the new condos, across from the state complex. It was an older home in the front. They built off the back to make an infill development there. So taking kind of an older property and then adding on to it typically.
Generally underutilized property.
Yeah.
There's more space.
If that project had waited just a few more months, they could have added a few more units there perhaps, or they could have at least done it differently. So, but they could have added garages, they could have done a few other things there, but that's okay. It still looks nice. So, so that's what infill is.
Mike, in the example of the person that bought the 2 sheds and turned them into living quarters,
Yeah.
if they had already had a single family home on there
Mhm.
and then added the other 2,
Yeah.
would that have been acceptable?
No, you could only add one more unit,
Gotcha.
and
Unless it was on water and sewer.
right, unless it was on water and sewer, correct.
And it has to be water and sewer,
Yeah.
not just
Correct.
water or whatever.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, then we'd be really good shape if that was
Yeah.
the case. It has to be water and sewer. Yeah.
Which is interesting when you say, though, you guys don't have any control over the septic aspect of it.
Right.
But is that accurate you do?
Well, the state mandated
state
that.
does it, gotcha.
So we just have to follow what the state says.
Gotcha.
And so there's been times where, some people still think they're doing something wrong now. Well, maybe fire safety might say they are, but, if you want to, put a ADU above your garage and that's up to you. That's fire safety's job to go out there. I forgot the name of the Waterbury office supervisor. Ben. We had a meeting with him, and I think one step above him too this last summer. And we talked about that Waterbury, in a very, very draft format, has some what I call building codes light. Where we do have some building codes that we've kind of drafted and taken a look at, but we haven't figured out how we're going to administer those yet. Is it going to be through a partnership with fire safety and we're going to start doing our own inspections, or is it going to be just very light stuff like requiring, like we're going to say that you have to have smoke detectors, or we're going to say you have to have the proper egress, as opposed to just relying totally on the state. One of the things that we're concerned about, and I changed it on every permit that I issue, is that even little things like having the address markers are required to be as part of any permit. I'm very concerned about fire department access and EMS access to these properties. The more we build at high density or allow for more density, the more issues we're going to have with gaining access to these folks. And also, if you put an ADU above, you live out in Waterbury Center, and you put an ADU above your garage, the fire department has to know that, right? The town should know that. And so this software also that we're getting talks to other software that a lot of fire departments use, Active 911 and some other ones. There's crosstalk. So if you're responding to the call, you should know now that there's an apartment here at this location. So that's what we're kind of working towards. It's slow, very slow process in municipal government. And so, but we're getting there. It's just taking time to be able to get there. But we are concerned about fire safety issues. That's kind of my angle that I come at a lot of this stuff. I know the planning commission knows this, Neil knows this. We're talking about better road maintenance, having better, being able, me or someone from the town being able to go out to these properties and say, hey, this was supposed to be a turnaround for a pull-off for tankers. You're not maintaining it. You got to do it. I'm not issuing any permits on this road until you fix it, right? So we have to have some way to compel these folks to maintain the roads properly as we add more units and as we make our bylaws a lot more liberal. Some of these roads, like up in the center, for example, those neighborhoods were approved for 12 homes. So if 6 people went and put ADUs on, now it's more residents on those roads. So should the roads be wider? So there's things like that we're trying to manage here and try to figure out a way that we can, compel people to change or make your roads better. So, and I will say, if you look at Stowe and you look at some of these other towns, we're very liberal here, and I think we need to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to private roads.
So Mike, I just wanted to understand, I'll end the question. So if you're on water and sewer, you can add up to, I think you said 9 units?
Yes.
But if you're not, you can only add 1 unit?
Or you can have 2 units if it's new.
Or if it's new, okay.
Yeah.
But a total of only 2 on the property, or not necessarily?
Unless you wanted to go, you have to check the zoning bylaws, and depending what zoning district you're in, you might have to go to DRB, maybe. Depends. Well, and if you're in downtown, you probably do have to go. If you're in the historic district, that's a lot of the downtown. So, yeah.
And once the town plan eventually gets to other sections, that may change some of that.
There's a lot of, like I said, pockets of opportunity,
Yeah.
and so sometimes I really do have to think about it. And so, I have to go, oh yeah, that's totally. I had someone come in recently and they want to put 9 units in. And then I was like, oh crap, what am I doing? I can't approve that. It has to go to, they're in the historic district. You know what I mean? So I have to go back and look, but then when I went back and looked, they're just over the line of the historic district, but still in the new bylaws, so they actually don't have to go to the DRB. So it's things like that I have to really be careful of, especially as we change the bylaws and they're, making sure they're 100% accurate, because this property was right on the line. So actually Neil and I worked on it to try to verify and make sure we weren't missing something, that the line wasn't accidentally moved or something. Yeah.
Are there any questions?
Oh yeah,
in the
questions
chat?
online? Sorry.
Not yet.
It looks like
There's tallying up, yeah.
Well, I've also been relaying some of the questions, so,
Oh, okay.
so folks can hear what's happening in the audience. And Neil is adding answers in the chat.
And I guess one of the questions was if on water and sewer, up to 9 units can be added. If not, maybe up to 2. So if you're not on water and sewer, because of it was not Act 147, it's Act 179 from 2020, you can have 2 units, the main residence and an ADU. And that is for anyone. If you're up in the center, you don't have water and sewer connections, that's fine. You can have that ADU. So basically it eliminated single family zoning in the state of Vermont. But if you are on water and sewer, the up to 9 units is partly based on your zoning district, but also partly regulated by Act 250. So you can have up to 9 units without going to Act 250. For instance, if you're in the former village, you could build up a property up to 9 units without going to Act 250. But once you hit that 10th unit, that usually triggers Act 250. Although there are some exceptions to that. So we have our designated downtown village, designated downtown district, which is our downtown. If you're in there, there are new exemptions added through the Home Act where you would not have to go to Act 250, even if you increased it beyond 9 units. But outside of a designated downtown district, if you added 10 units, then the state Act 250 process, which is the state level zoning regulations, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. But you would also have to get a permit from the state permitting agency called Act 250. So it does add that extra layer. So a lot of times, for instance, as Mike pointed out, down on South Main across from the state complex, which now is called Gardner Lane, that's 9 units, and that's 9 units on purpose. So they didn't have to go to Act 250.
If I could expand on that, it's the new let's make it more complicated. Temporary. It's if you are within the designated downtown or a half a mile around that downtown. And it also applies for the village center and Waterbury Center, the designated village center, which is a much smaller area, but that exemption is up to a development with 50 housing units and then a quarter-mile radius around that village center. That you would not have to go through Act 250.
Mike, can you restate that for the folks on Zoom?
Sorry, I don't know. Yeah, do you want to come up and just say that real quick again?
Sure. Thank you, the audio is long.
When you mention Act 250, it makes my head hurt sometimes because there's so many stories and maybe it's gonna happen, maybe it's not gonna happen.
Unfortunately, I have to think about it too much. So the current exemptions from Act 250 would apply in Waterbury to our designated downtown and a half a mile radius around that downtown in which you can build a housing development with any number of units, there's no cap, and Waterbury Center's designated village center, which is around the triangle and the Grange Hall area, and a quarter-mile radius around that center, you could build a housing development of up to 50 units without triggering Act 250.
So just one other thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No. So one other thing I'll just say before I'm done is we do have lots of opportunity here in Waterbury for development now that could be built out. There are several places where we could add a lot of housing, and it's just been a struggle for a while. Neil and I, or at least I was meeting with people, 1 or 2 projects a week. People were coming in with what ifs. Can we do this? Can we do that? But then we don't hear from them again. I think about even if half those projects turned out to be something, our housing stock would look way different in this town. And so I just want everyone to know there are lots of opportunities for development in Waterbury. It's just getting the developer, and I've been out, Neil and I went to a lot of conferences this fall. I call it dialing for dollars. I've been on the phone with developers. I've got them down here. We've had meetings. We've walked different sites. It's on radar, but some of these projects take a year or two to even get to a design phase or anything like that. There's also, and then one other thing I'll say is there is a large swath of land that's for sale right now over at the end of Lincoln Street that they've been trying to sell for a while, and that could really be something there, housing. And it's right outside of the Phase 1 bylaws. I know they were hoping to maybe even come to the Planning Commission to talk about just extending the boundary just for that one area, because that would almost double what they could do right now for single-family homes. So, and that's all in water and sewer. So there are lots of opportunities. It's just getting people here to start building and finding the developers. So, anything else? All right. So I guess it's fire safety's turn.
So I'm Sean Goodell. I'm with the State Fire Marshal's Office out of the Waterbury, one of the Assistant State Fire Marshals. There are many of us. We have plumbing inspectors, electrical inspectors, and then 5 fire marshals. We've also taken over the health officership in a lot of ways from different towns that we handle a lot of the complaints. So I'm here, I'm going to talk about ADUs and duplexes and requirements from our office. because I know that the town has their own things, but on the state level, we have jurisdiction in fire and life safety in most towns in Vermont unless they have an MOU with us. So when we start talking about ADUs, duplexes, you have to do a state construction permit. Everything is online with us. You cannot fill them out online and submit them. We are in the paper world, and I haven't heard much of it changing yet. With ADUs, typically people that are doing ADUs put it inside an existing building. So they're taking a space that they currently have and gonna make it into an apartment. So that can be a small construction permit. There's gonna be a couple of different permits on our website. Small construction means any construction that's under $200,000 that's a renovation or modification, which this would fall underneath. Now, when you take a single family home and you make it into add a ADU, duplex, state code doesn't differentiate between duplex and ADU. It's all a rental. So whether it's 1 and 2 family, or then it goes to apartment buildings when you hit 3 for codes. So like an ADU, if you put that in there, you have to have it 1 hour rated from your existing building. So if you take the upstairs, it's got to be 1 hour rated between floors. So there's a lot of things with that, and a lot of people will try to do that on their own. It's not required. I would always recommend get some sort of designer or engineer to help you out to do it correct so it doesn't hold things up. When you submit the permit to our office, it can take up to 30 days. If the paperwork is incorrect or they're missing something, it will get shot back to you and it starts over from the time that it's resubmitted. A duplex can be a little bit different because you might have an existing building and you want to add square footage on. That goes to a regular construction permit. There's a lot of different pieces of paperwork that you're going to need when that happens. There can be an architect that can be required. Even on an ADU, the local fire marshal, I do not cover Waterbury, someone else does, but the local fire marshal can ask for architectural drawings at any point in time on any project that's happening. When you get into the larger project, like adding the duplex, our plans review team may ask for that because they're gonna review this and they're gonna make sure that it's 100%. And then you're gonna get plumbing, electrical, those are required. So the tradespeople are required to put in what we call work notices for the work they're doing, and we make sure that it's up to code. Typically with a duplex, once again, it's going to be like an ADU. It's going to be 1 hour rated. That's actually a Vermont code. It's in our Building and Life Safety Code 2015. We are getting ready to do an update, hopefully this year on those. It's a little behind the times with some of the things in there.
You might want to explain 1 hour rated.
So 1 hour rated means it's a listed by UL listing, which is United Laboratories, on how to make a 1 hour assembly of a wall. So it might be 2 layers of sheetrock with rock wool in between. It might be a layer of 5/8 added onto a ceiling with hat channel and another layer of 5/8. So we have an air gap in between. Everything that we do for listings are United Laboratory listings. So you can go on their website and sign up. You can tell them what you're trying to do. If you're looking for a 1 hour ceiling, it'll give you multiple options. So there's not just one way to do it, there's multiple. If the building has a sprinkler system, I'm not sure if there's any here that already have them that are single family. I deal with the Stowe area. There are some that do have sprinkler systems in them. Sprinkler systems take away a lot of the codes. So you can get away with not putting an egress window in. You can get away with adding distance to exits. There's lots of things that you can manipulate when you have a sprinkler system in your building. And some towns are really pushing sprinkler systems. If you're part of the downtown tax designation, they have a lot of funds out there if you're required to have one to get the money to put one in. When you submit the plans to our office, it's just down the road here, there's a team in there that reviews these. If it's the under 200K, typically it'll be called a field plans review, which the field inspector will do on their own and submit and issue the permit. If it gets to the $200,000 mark, they're gonna do a plan review. We have a group in the office and that's all they do, is they go through all the plans that come in to make sure that they're code compliant. They're gonna look for fire department access. They're gonna look at, plumbing plans. They're gonna look at, if it's in a required ADA for American Disabilities Act, to see if it needs to meet that. So they're gonna go through everything, and typically they can do that within 30 days.
Separate building, garage, apartment, not attached to the house requirements?
So if you have a
Could you just repeat that question for them, for Zoom, please?
if it's a garage apartment that's separated from the house. So if it is, and your exiting comes down through that garage, and that's a vehicle parking area, right, inside the garage. So if there's a vehicle in there, it's 1 hour rated, that's gonna come down to go to the exterior. Now, a couple ways to do that. You can get to the bottom, you can rate all the way down to go to the exterior door, or you have a door up in that apartment that goes outside from the unit directly to the exterior. So it depends on what that garage is used for. But if it's ever used to park a car in there, it's typically going to be 1 hour rated in between.
And are state permits required for that?
State permits are required for that. So if you have an apartment, if you're putting in an apartment above a garage, it's considered a rental. So Vermont goes by rentals, right? So if the building is rented, I believe state statute states that if it's rented for more than 24 hours in the period of 1 year, it falls under a so-called public building.
What about ADU use specifically for family members? So like an in-law apartment, essentially.
So an in-law apartment, if you're not charging rent and it's a direct family member, that doesn't fall under the code because it's an in-law apartment. So it's technically not a rental. Now, if you have that and then in 3 years it's a mother-in-law apartment and then they move away and then you go to an apartment, you'll have to bring that up to code. So it might be making it the 1 hour or adding an exterior set of stairs to go to the ground level.
So an ADU that's either attached to the main house or inside the main house, what implications does that have for the main house itself?
So anytime you have that, you also have to bring the main house up to code. So the whole building is what has to be brought up to code. It's not just the part that you build, it's the whole building. So typically what will happen is when you get a permit from us for that, whoever the inspector is for that area will come out, do a walkthrough of the whole building. They'll let you know what you have to do. It's good to get them involved early because if it's if it's a couple of egress windows that you're gonna have to put in, it can take time. They might not have those on the shelves. They might take 3 months to get in. So it's always good to get our office involved early so there's nothing hidden at the end. Someone comes out for a final inspection and then goes through your house because that's the first time they've been able to get in there and find that you have, maybe your smokes and smoke seals aren't up to code, maybe egress isn't up to code, handrails, guards. It can take some time to get those things done.
I know Vermont can be fairly liberal in terms of allowing homeowners to do upgrades that maybe you would otherwise hire a professional for. When, for example, you're adding an ADU to an existing home and you have to bring the whole home up to code and say, they don't have existing plumbing or architectural drawings or anything like that, does all of that need to kind of be redone?
So what's going to happen is if you're going to do it, you're going to do the work yourself. So the construction part of it you can do yourself. Technically, if it's 2 units, you can do electrical. You still have to pull a work notice, and our electrical inspector will watch over it. Plumbing, if it's a rental or if it's on town water, then our plumbing inspector will be involved. And then you're gonna have to get a master or a licensed plumber to do the work. And they're gonna watch over that to make sure it's done right, just like the electrical inspector is gonna watch over the electrical work being done to make sure it's right. The construction part of it, they can do what homeowner can really do whatever work they want. There's no, in our office, there's no registry for contractors that they have to sign up for. OPR, Office of Professional Regulation, does have a registry for companies that want to do over $10,000 of residential work, and then but that's not governed by our office. That's all in OPR. So we don't come out there and we don't ask someone for a contractor's license. We will ask for plumbing, electrical licenses to see them, but nothing with a contractor.
So did those changes in that maybe Neil talked about from the Home Act and the other changes in 2020 time, it seems like they didn't really change how your office does business in terms of permitting.
Right, yeah, nothing has changed in our office as far as permitting with that. The only thing it's done is we've seen more permits. Yeah.
So what is exactly, my understanding that an ADU falls under a different category when you have the listing of what is required. It still would be required to have a plumbing inspection, but until it goes upgraded to a duplex, then it requires more inspections according to what the fire marshals.
So in our office, in ADUs, it's a rental. It's a rental property. If you get into the codes, and in Vermont, we use NFPA for existing, IBC for anything new for construction. NFPA doesn't differentiate between an ADU. It has, so in there it's called Chapter 24, it's 1 and 2 family dwellings. Mm-hmm. And that's where the codes would fall underneath for an ADU.
So what exactly is the difference between an ADU and an in-law apartment?
So
my understanding with
it depends on the in-law apartment. If you've got, your mother-in-law living there, and you're not charging them rent, then really that's your family that's in there. Once it's rented out, even if you have a caretaker on your property that lives there, but you pay them by giving them the place to live in for exchange for work, that's technically a rental. So really when it doesn't, or when it excludes us coming in, is when it's going to be for an in-law apartment. But they don't differentiate that in the code, other than to say it's not a, we look at it as it's not a rental. Once it's rented, and that's when you're going to go into that 1 and 2 family. There's also another section in Vermont that we call the 2015 Building and Life Safety Code. It's online, you can look through there, and they make changes to things. Because if you look in NFPA, a good example, NFPA says 1 and 2 family, every building will have a sprinkler system. Well, in Vermont, we can't do that. So we take it out in our rules.
What would trigger ADA requirements?
When they started talking about adding 9 units, you'll start getting into some ADA. But typically in 1 and 2 family, you're not gonna run into ADA.
3 and up, you do. Yeah.
Yep.
It's 3 and up.
3 and up, yeah,
Yep.
which is what we had to do.
Yeah, so you'll run into, it's a percentage, and then it'll tell you whether you gotta make it ADA, or does it have to be vestibule. So basically that means that, in a bathroom, you're putting blocking in walls to make, if you end up with someone like that, you can change it over quickly.
Sorry.
You're fine. Ask away.
If it's a, for my house, I already have an existing ADU. If we were theoretically to put a 3rd unit, above our garage at some point, would that then trigger ADA requirements for all of the units?
So no, that wouldn't trigger anything for all the units. What that may trigger is the new unit that you're putting in. of bringing it up to ADA.
Okay.
You know, there's some things with that within the fire marshal's office, like if your third unit's it's above a garage,
Right.
you know, to put an elevator in is a little difficult and a little costly.
Yeah.
So typically it would be, you know, maybe making the downstairs one vistable, so adding things in there, so if something happened, you could actually turn that into a unit.
No more questions?
Any questions on any of it? Airbnbs?
Actually, I do have a question on that.
Yeah.
So, just for example, I was looking at them in Stowe, and there is one that is in a basement. I mean, like literally in a basement without any egress. I mean, a walkout, that's it. How does that happen? I mean,
Well, so with Airbnbs, Stowe's getting ready for a registry in there, and I do cover Stowe. So I know a lot that's happening there, and there's a lot of these like that are like that, or ones that, or there's one in there that has 19 bedrooms. So there's a lot of codes that go with that, but because there's so many, we would be so overwhelmed if I went on to Airbnb site and I wanted to pull them all up and look and see what violations I found. I wouldn't have enough time in a year. I cover, you know, 18 to 20 towns. I would never have enough time in a year to go to them all. So when we handle them, we're on, it's all by complaints right now, whether it's from the fire department, someone staying there. I think with this new registry, it'll be a self-certified thing, just because there's just not enough time to get them all inspected. But that's super dangerous.
Okay. Any questions from people online before we wrap up? Thank you, Sean.
You're welcome.
So just in wrapping up, just a couple of points. So for those of you that are here, there's a survey you can take. You can take it by just scanning this QR code. We'll leave it up there, or there's some paper forms on the table. For those of you at home, if you would please just scan that QR code and take a quick survey and give us your feedback. We would appreciate it. Also, for further information, we have up here a website on the Housing Task Force website on the town website. Housing Task Force page on the town website. You'll find additional information about that there, but you'll also find, which we don't have here, just info at Waterbury, housing@waterburyvt.com is our email address. So if you have any questions about what you heard tonight, what you didn't hear tonight, housing@waterburyvt.com, send it over and we'll get back to you with answers. Our next workshop is February 18th? No, March 18th. Right, and we'll be talking about design and construction, and we hope to see everyone there. But thank you, and thank you for all of our speakers tonight.